All right, so get this. We're diving deep into Indian politics. Like, imagine you have to give a presentation on this, and you want to sound like a pro, not just some, Wikipedia skimmer.
Yeah, and that's where this deep dive comes in. We've got all these excerpts, right, from actual academic papers about those crazy Indian political parties and their wild elections, all those forces that shape this vibrant democracy.
It's a lot, right? We're going way beyond just the headlines, unearthing those surprising facts, the kind that'll make you the most interesting person at your next dinner party, or I don't know, maybe that presentation you've got coming up.
You're going to ace it after this.
So, okay, let's jump in. First up, the sheer number of political parties in India. It's mind-blowing. Hit us with the numbers.
Okay, so as of 2019, there were over 2,300 registered political parties in India.
2,300?
Yeah.
Seriously?
Yeah.
It's like trying to pick a favorite dish from an endless buffet.
Right.
But, okay, why so many? Seriously.
Well, you got to think about it, right? India's size, the social fabric, it all contributes to this incredible diversity. And then there's their electoral system, right? Which often leads to hung parliaments.
Hung parliaments.
Yeah. So, no single party wins a majority.
Ah, okay.
So it encourages coalitions and alliances, which further fragments, the political scene.
So are we talking parties for, like, every interest imaginable?
Absolutely. You've got parties representing religions, castes, languages, specific regions, like the Shiv Sena. They're known for their Marathi Hindu nationalist ideology, while the Muslim League, they focus on, Muslim interests.
Right.
And then you have this incredible range, too. I mean, India's political spectrum is broad.
Yeah.
You've got everything from communist parties, like the CPI and CPM, all the way to right-leaning parties like the BJP.
So it's not just a simple left versus right thing.
Oh, no, not at all.
It sounds more like a political kaleidoscope.
Yeah.
But with so many parties, how does anyone actually get recognized, as a major player?
Well, to be a national party, you need to meet certain criteria.
Okay, like what?
They need to secure at least 6% of the valid votes in at least 4 states during a general election for the Lok Sabha.
Ah, for the Lok Sabha.
Yeah.
So you can't just be, like, super popular in one state.
No. You need a much broader base of support.
Okay, what about parties that mainly operate in, like, one specific state? What are the rules for them?
It's similar concept, but on the state level. So a party is recognized as a state party if they get 6% of the valid votes in that state during a state assembly election. And this is important, and win at least 2 seats in that assembly.
Okay, so it's votes and actual seats won.
Exactly.
Makes sense. But what about those parties built around one leader, like a charismatic figure? Do they have a big impact?
Oh, yeah. Personality-driven parties. That's a fascinating thing about Indian politics. They can be influential, especially in the short term. But it all depends, on the popularity of that one person.
So they can fade away if the leader loses their star power.
Yeah, it's another layer of complexity to an already intricate system.
It's a lot to keep track of. Okay, so we've got national parties and then those personality-driven ones. But how do things play out on, like, a regional level? I'm guessing those regional parties have shaken things up.
Oh, absolutely. So they started out focused on state-level politics.
Right.
But regional parties now, they have a lot of influence, even at the national level, especially with all these coalition governments.
So they're not just playing in their own backyard anymore. They're impacting national decisions.
Exactly. They're involved in those coalition formations, gives them leverage to influence national policies, forces national leaders to be more responsive to, regional needs. It's like political chess, but on a grand scale.
Okay, give us some examples. Who are some of these regional powerhouses and what makes them so effective?
Well, you've got the Biju Janata Dal, or BJD, in Odisha.
Okay, the BJD.
Yeah, they've dominated state politics for years. And they've even been part of, national coalitions. Then there's the DMK and AIADMK in Tamil Nadu.
Okay.
They're both deeply rooted in regional identity. And they wield a lot of political power.
Wow. Any others?
Oh, yeah. Let's not forget the Akali Dal in Punjab, another force to be reckoned with.
It's fascinating how each region has its own kind of political flavor.
Right. You've got those focused on cultural and ethnic identities, then others with national aspirations. But, limited base. Some emerge from splits within national parties. And, of course, we can't forget those charismatic personality-driven ones we talked about earlier.
Right, right. So much variety. And this diversity in regional politics, it has a huge impact on how power is distributed and exercised in India.
Exactly. It makes it much more complex and interesting than just focusing on those national players.
You can't truly grasp the national picture without getting those regional dynamics, which are constantly evolving, shaping that national landscape.
You got it. It's all interconnected.
Okay, so let's talk elections in India. It's a pretty big deal, right?
Oh, yeah. We're talking the world's largest democratic exercise. Over 900 million eligible voters.
That's a lot of people.
It's a massive undertaking. We're talking polling spread over multiple days, millions of those electronic voting machines. And the constituencies, they vary wildly in size.
Guys, like geographically.
Yeah. You've got everything from the compact Chanity Chowk, in Delhi,
Okay.
to the vast expanse of Ladakh.
Wow, so campaigning in Ladakh must be a whole different ballgame.
You can say that again.
So break it down for us. What are the key stages in this logistical marvel?
Okay, so the Election Commission, they announce the schedule. That's the first thing. Then comes the nomination period, right? Then there's scrutiny of those nominations, a chance for withdrawals, and then boom, the official campaign period kicks off. And then finally, you've got the polling days. All those nail-biting moments as they count the votes, culminating in the declaration of results.
It's like a political thriller with the entire nation on the edge of their seats.
That's a great way to put it.
But with so much at stake, how do they ensure fairness and transparency?
That's where the model code of conduct comes in. So it's a set of guidelines that kick in as soon as the election schedule is announced. It regulates the behavior of political parties and candidates during the campaign.
So no, like, dirty tricks allowed.
Exactly. It's all about regulating campaign spending, preventing that inflammatory language, ensuring fair access to media, preventing the misuse of government resources, all that stuff.
Okay, so level playing field as much as possible. What about the actual voting process? You mentioned electronic voting machines before, but anything else that our listener might find interesting?
Oh, yeah, definitely. So they use symbols alongside the candidate names on those ballots. Yeah. It's really helpful, in a country with varying literacy rates. So you might see, I don't know, a lotus flower or a hand pump next to a candidate's name.
Makes it easier to identify them.
Exactly. It's a unique feature. Makes voting more accessible. Visually engaging, too.
It's really smart. Anything else?
Oh, well. They have regulations on media coverage, too, to make sure things are impartial. And honestly, the Election Commission of India, they deserve huge credit for managing this whole thing, this incredibly complex process, ensuring, millions of people can vote in a fair and efficient way.
It's a remarkable feat. But okay, let's shift gears a bit. Let's talk about those voters themselves. What actually influences their choices? I know people say it's all about caste and religion, but I'm guessing it's more complicated than that.
Oh, absolutely. It's way more nuanced than that. While caste and religion do play a role sometimes, Indian voters are influenced by a whole bunch of factors. Socioeconomic ones, political ones, you name it.
Okay, so it's not a simple equation. What are some of those key elements?
Well, you've got regionalism and language. Those are big, often tied to, local identities and concerns. Then there's the charisma of those political leaders.
Yeah.
That's always been a factor.
Yeah.
Think about, like, Jawaharlal Nehru.
Right.
His personality, it commanded huge loyalty.
So a leader's personality can really transcend those traditional political divides.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
But it's not just about those national figures, though, right? What about the local scene, the ground game?
Absolutely crucial, especially in those rural areas. So you got your caste dynamics, right? Factional alliances within villages, all sorts of hyper-local issues can significantly impact how people vote.
So all politics is local, as they say.
Exactly. Even in a country as vast as India, those local dynamics, they really matter.
And those dynamics, they feed into the larger political landscape, right? Especially when you're talking about coalition building, which brings us to another fascinating piece of the puzzle, coalitions. And those defections, it's like a political soap opera.
Yeah.
With all these shifting alliances and unexpected twists.
It really is. So, no single party usually gets a clear majority.
Right.
So coalition governments, they've become the norm.
Okay.
And that just adds another layer of complexity because you need compromise, negotiation, and sometimes, well, a little bit of political maneuvering.
Which is where those defections come in.
Got it.
Okay, but first, let's Let's define coalition politics, specifically in India. It's about bringing together different parties,
Yeah.
potentially with different ideologies to form a government.
Precisely. So it means multiple parties, each with their own goals, their own priorities,
Mhm.
have to find some common ground, agree on at least a minimum program, and they have to be willing to compromise on some of their objectives for the sake of actually governing.
Sounds tricky.
Oh, it definitely can be.
And Indian political history is full of examples of these coalitions, right?
Yeah. Take the Janata Party government. In 1977,
Okay.
it was formed by a coalition, a party opposed to the Congress Party, the classic example. And then you have the various United Front governments in the 1990s. More examples of how coalitions have, really shaped Indian democracy.
So they add complexity, but they're an integral part of the system.
Yeah, they are.
But are they a good thing? I mean, what are the pros and cons? You mentioned instability earlier. Is that the main risk?
Instability is a valid concern, yeah. Disagreements between partners can lead to a government collapsing.
Right.
Also, smaller parties can end up with a lot of power, holding larger parties hostage to their demands. It's a delicate balancing act for sure.
And then you have those defections, right?
Yeah.
Just adds another level of unpredictability.
Yeah.
What makes a politician switch sides?
It's a mix of things, really. Personal ambition, maybe some ideological shifts, the lure of power, and sometimes just plain opportunism.
Wow.
It's a phenomenon that has caused a lot of problems. Instability, erosion of public trust.
So how has India tried to address that? I mean, they haven't just let this run wild.
No. In 1985, they introduced something called the Anti-Defection Law.
Okay, and what does that do?
It aimed to, curb those opportunistic switches, bring some stability,
Yeah.
especially for coalition governments.
Sounds like a good idea. Did it work?
Well, that's a question that has generated a lot of debate. It's had some impact, definitely, but it hasn't totally eliminated the problem. There's still some loopholes.
So those savvy politicians can find a way around it.
You know it. And a lot depends on the Speaker of the House, how they interpret the law, how they enforce it.
So it's not a foolproof solution.
No, but it's an attempt to grapple with a complex issue.
It makes you realize that coalitions and defections, with all their drama, they're a key part of the Indian political system.
Absolutely. It reflects how dynamic and evolving Indian democracy is.
Right.
Where power is constantly being negotiated, challenged, recalibrated.
It's a reminder that focusing only on elections and formal political structures, it doesn't give you the whole picture.
Right. There are forces at play outside the ballot box that shape the landscape.
We're talking pressure groups, activists, all those influencers, exerting pressure from outside that traditional system.
Exactly. And to really understand Indian politics, you need to explore the role of these non-party actors.
Right.
Who, even though they don't, contest elections, they can still have a big influence on government decisions.
It's like that saying, the squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? These groups, they know how to get attention, how to make those demands heard. So what's it like in India specifically?
Well, India has this incredibly diverse range of pressure groups, reflects their pluralistic society. You have those powerful business lobbies like FICCI, the Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry. Then you have influential student unions, religious organizations, groups based on caste, and even those advocating for specific language rights. It's a real mix of voices, all vying for influence and change.
So it's not just about, like, rich corporations or individuals trying to sway things.
No, not at all. It's much more grassroots, diverse voices trying to shape the agenda.
Right. So how do they actually operate? How do they get things done?
Well, they use a variety of tactics, lobbying, of course, but also they run publicity campaigns. They file petitions, organize protests, and sometimes even resort to strikes,
Yeah.
to exert pressure. They get the power of collective action.
Okay, let's get specific. Who are some of those influential pressure groups, and how have they actually impacted policy?
Right. Well, there's the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, the RSS. It's a Hindu nationalist organization, very influential, often seen as shaping the agenda of the ruling BJP party.
Right.
And then there are groups like the Narmada Bachao Andolan. It's a movement fighting for those displaced by the Narmada Dam project.
Yeah.
Really highlighting the social and environmental costs of development.
Interesting.
And these are just two examples, right? You've got countless others working on so many issues,
Yeah.
from environmental protection to women's rights to social justice. you name it.
It's fascinating how these groups, operating outside the traditional system, can still have so much influence.
Yeah, it shows you that democracy is not just about voting every few years. It's about active participation, making your voice heard, using that collective power to shape the future.
And in a country as diverse as India, that participation, it takes many forms. Whether it's through voting, joining a pressure group, or advocating for change at a local level, it all contributes to the dynamism of India's democracy.
Right. It reminds us that democracy isn't static. It's this dynamic process, constantly striving for something better.
But with all this incredible diversity, all these competing interests, how does India strive for national unity? It must be a constant balancing act.
You've hit on a central challenge that India has faced since independence.
Right.
With so many languages,
Right.
religions, regions, castes, achieving that national integration, it's complex, it's ongoing.
So what does national integration actually mean in the Indian context? Is it about, erasing those differences? Or is it something else?
It's not about erasing them, it's about acknowledging them, respecting them, but also fostering a sense of shared identity, shared purpose,
Yeah.
Creating a nation where diversity is a strength, not a weakness.
Okay, so unity and diversity. But how do you achieve that unity when there are, historical factors that have caused divisions?
That's a good point. The legacy of those British colonial policies, they often exploited those existing social divisions. It still casts a shadow. Even after independence, issues like regionalism, communalism, casteism, they've posed challenges to national integration.
So what concrete steps has India taken to actually promote that national unity, to address those historical divisions?
Well, in 1961, they established the National Integration Council, the NIC.
Yeah, I see. Okay.
Yeah, it brings together leaders from different parties, different states, civil society, to talk about these issues.
So it's like a forum for dialogue and collaboration.
Exactly. It's an attempt to, find some common ground, build bridges across those divides.
What kind of impact has it had?
It's played a role in things like interfaith dialogue, addressing regional imbalances, advocating for policies that promote social harmony.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about those people who are, affected by communal violence? Are there any initiatives that offer support and help them heal?
Yes, definitely. The National Foundation for Communal Harmony, the NFCH, was established in 1992. They work hard to promote harmony and provide assistance to victims of that violence, especially children.
So a crucial organization working at that grassroots level.
Yeah, trying to heal those wounds, rebuild trust.
It's good to hear about these initiatives, striving to create a more inclusive and harmonious society. It shows that even with these complex challenges, there's still this dedication to building a nation where everyone feels like they belong.
Exactly. And that's really the essence of national integration, isn't it? Creating a space where that diversity is truly embraced. And people from all backgrounds, they feel valued, respected as equal members of the nation.
And speaking of complex, we can't forget about those coalition governments, where parties with all sorts of different ideologies and agendas have to find ways to actually work together for the common good.
Yeah, it's a delicate dance.
A lot of compromise, negotiation. And sometimes, it gets chaotic, especially when you add those defections. Loyalties shift, allegiances change overnight, and boom, the whole political landscape transforms.
It's a high-stakes game.
It really highlights how democracy isn't, some static thing.
Yeah.
It's dynamic, it's constantly evolving, adapting to all these changing circumstances, reflecting the will of, the people.
Yeah, that's the beauty of it.
And in a country as big and diverse as India, it's bound to be fascinating, challenging, full of surprises.
Absolutely. Keeps things interesting.
So we've covered a lot today. Political parties, the whole election process, the influence of those pressure groups, and the quest for national integration. But there's still so much more to unpack.
Oh, yeah, there is. We haven't even gotten to the impact of technology or the changing role of media, all those global forces that are shaping India's political landscape.
Right. It's a reminder that learning is like a never-ending journey. We got to be open to those new perspectives, the evolving realities.
I couldn't agree more.
So, to our listeners, consider this a starting point, right? For your own exploration of Indian politics. There are tons of stories out there waiting to be discovered, connections to be made, insights to be gained.
Exactly. Keep digging.
Who knows? Maybe you'll be the one to find those hidden gems, the ones that reshape how we understand this fascinating democracy.
Always be curious.
Stay engaged. Keep asking those questions. We'll be back soon. for part 2, with even more insights and thought-provoking discussions. So stay tuned.
So we're shifting gears a bit now, moving from, India's internal dynamics to its place on the world stage.
Right, from domestic politics to India's role in the world.
Yeah, exactly. You see this nation that's navigating those complexities of international relations with this blend of historical experience, national interests, and this vision, right, for a more just global order.
Okay, so what's shaped India's foreign policy over the years? I mean, it's got to be more than just geography, right?
Oh, definitely. Well, geography does play a role. Think about those shared borders with so many nations, some with, well, historically complex relationships. But there's a lot more at play. Their colonial past, the commitment to non-alignment, their role as a leader, in the developing world, and that aspiration to be a major player on the global stage, it all contributes to this unique foreign policy perspective.
So it's like historical baggage, current realities, and hopes for the future, all mixed together.
Yeah, pretty much.
What are some of those core principles that have guided India's foreign policy, since independence?
Well, one of the most fundamental ones is anti-colonialism.
Makes sense.
Right.
Yeah, totally.
Having experienced colonial rule themselves, India has consistently championed the cause of decolonization, supported those liberation movements worldwide.
Okay, any specific examples of that commitment to anti-colonialism in action?
Sure. Look at India's stance against apartheid in South Africa.
Right.
They were a vocal critic of that regime, played a key role in those international efforts to isolate South Africa.
So it wasn't just talk, they actually took action. What other principles have shaped India's approach to the world?
Another big one is non-alignment. So during the Cold War, India chose not to side with either the U.S.-led Western Bloc or the Soviet-led Eastern Bloc.
The non-aligned movement. That was a big deal back then.
Yeah, choosing independence, neutrality. During such a polarized time, that was a challenge.
For sure.
But it allowed India to maintain, autonomy in their foreign policy. They engaged with both sides.
Yeah.
While still pursuing their own interests.
So strategic, but also principled.
Yeah. And it also gave them a platform to advocate for those concerns, specific to developing nations, issues related to decolonization, economic development.
So they carved out their own space in a very divided world.
Exactly. And a lot of that vision was articulated through the principles of
Panchil.
Panchil.
Yeah.
It means 5 principles. It's about peaceful coexistence.
Yeah.
Something India promoted along with China back in the 1950s.
Okay, so what are those 5 principles and how did they impact India's foreign policy?
Well, it's all centered around things like mutual respect for territorial integrity, non-aggression, non-interference in each other's internal affairs, equality, and, of course, peaceful coexistence.
Yeah.
Really provided a framework for, building trust, cooperation between nations, especially those emerging from colonial rule.
It sounds like a blueprint for a totally different kind of international relations, based on collaboration,
Right.
not conflict.
Right. And it resonated with a lot of countries,
Yeah.
especially in Asia and Africa. They saw it as a way to assert their own independence, navigate that post-colonial world.
So it became a cornerstone of India's foreign policy.
Yeah, and it still influences their approach even today.
So while maintaining this non-aligned stance, did India also develop strong relationships with other, newly independent nations, especially those in Asia and Africa?
Oh, absolutely. They always prioritize closer ties with those Asian and African nations. It's sometimes called the Afro-Asian bias.
Interesting term.
It reflects those shared historical experiences,
Yeah,
common challenges, and a vision for a more equitable world order where the voices of those developing countries actually matter.
It's a sense of solidarity.
Yeah.
How has this focus on Asia and Africa played out, in actual practice?
Well, India has been a strong advocate for those developing nations' interests in international forums. Like the United Nations, played a key role in establishing the non-aligned movement. And the Group of 77, those are organizations that, sought to amplify the voices of those developing countries on a global stage.
So it's not just about political solidarity, it's about taking action.
Right. India has also been a major provider of development assistance to those other Asian and African nations, sharing expertise in areas like agriculture, technology, education, It reflects their commitment to fostering growth and cooperation within that developing world.
Makes sense. Building alliances and supporting development, they go hand in hand.
Absolutely.
Speaking of global platforms, how about India's role in the UN? They've been a member since the very beginning.
Oh, yeah, founding member.
Yeah.
And they've consistently played an active and constructive role. Always a strong supporter of multilateralism, peacekeeping, a rules-based international order.
So what are some of the highlights of India's contributions? What stands out?
Well, they've been a leading contributor to those UN peacekeeping missions,
Yeah.
sending troops all over the world to different conflict zones. They've also been vocal about disarmament, especially nuclear disarmament, really pushing for a safer, more secure world.
Right, right.
And, of course, they've been pushing for reform of the UN Security
We
Council.
want a permanent seat. Right.
Exactly, to reflect their growing global stature and influence.
So they're not just participating, they want to be a leader within the UN.
Yeah, shaping that global agenda,
Yeah.
pushing for reforms that reflect how the world's changing.
And it's important to remember that India's foreign policy has been shaped by, a lot of influential figures. Jawaharlal Nehru, right? India's first prime minister. He played a big role in defining their foreign policy in those early years.
Oh, yeah, definitely. He championed those ideas of non-alignment, pan-Shiel, Afro-Asian solidarity. It really set the stage for how India approached the world.
And it sounds like that vision still resonates today, even as it evolves. But beyond these big principles, India also has to, navigate those complex relationships with specific countries, right? Especially those neighbors.
Of course. It's a dynamic and diverse neighborhood, each country with its own, set of priorities. Managing those relationships is a constant balancing act. Requires a mix of diplomacy, strategic thinking, and just being adaptable.
So like a high-stakes game of diplomatic chess.
Exactly. Where every move you make can trigger a ripple effect throughout the region.
Okay, let's talk about some of those key relationships, starting with Pakistan, a relationship that's often been, marked by conflict and that historical baggage.
The India-Pakistan relationship, it's definitely one of the most complex and challenging in the world. They have that history of conflict, of course, and then the issue of Kashmir. It remains a major point of contention.
Yeah, it's dominated the headlines. And it's impacted the whole region's stability. What's the current state of affairs between those two?
It's been up and down over the years.
Yeah.
Periods of dialogue, then increased tensions. There have been attempts to improve things, build confidence. But then something happens, some act of terrorism, cross-border violence.
Yeah.
And those efforts get derailed.
Right.
There's a deep-seated lack of trust, which makes finding that path toward peace and normalization really difficult.
Even with that shared history and cultural ties,
Yeah.
building trust requires more than just, good intentions.
You're absolutely right. You need concrete actions to address those grievances, to foster an environment where dialogue can actually happen. It's a long and challenging process.
Takes patience, perseverance, and a willingness to move beyond the past.
For sure.
Okay, so the relationship with Pakistan remains complex. What about China, another neighbor with, a history of both cooperation and conflict?
Yeah, the India-China relationship, also multifaceted. It's partnership and rivalry, all mixed together. They share that long border, and there have been territorial disputes, of course, including the 1962 war.
That war really had a lasting impact, didn't it?
Oh, yeah. Created this legacy of mistrust.
Hard to overcome.
Definitely. But there have been a shift in recent years, right, towards greater economic engagement.
I've heard about that.
Bilateral trade is at a significant level. But that strategic rivalry, it persists, especially given China's growing assertiveness in the region and their close ties with Pakistan.
It sounds like a real balancing act, trying to foster economic cooperation, but also navigating those strategic concerns.
Exactly. And that dance gets even more complicated with the changing geopolitical landscape, particularly with the U.S. playing a more active role in the region.
Right.
China's rise, the evolving dynamics of the Asia-Pacific, it's created new challenges and new opportunities for India. They have to be really careful about how they calibrate their foreign policy.
So global politics, it's like a constantly shifting puzzle.
You could say that.
India has to stay agile, right, to secure their interests.
For sure.
So have they been strengthening ties with other major players?
Yeah, they've been forging those strategic partnerships with countries like the U.S., Japan, Australia.
Okay.
Those are vital for advancing their economic and security interests. It's not about forming, those exclusive blocs or alliances. It's about finding those areas of shared interest
Yeah.
and working together to address, common challenges.
So building a network of partners who share a similar vision for a more stable and prosperous world.
Exactly. And those partnerships, they go beyond just security and diplomacy. India's engaging in trade, technology, climate change initiatives, people-to-people exchanges. It's a multifaceted approach to international relations.
So India's foreign policy is becoming more assertive, more strategic, but they're still grounded in those core principles. It's that delicate balancing act. Requires foresight, diplomatic skills, and a clear vision for the future.
And that vision is constantly being, refined. As India strives to be a leading power, a responsible global citizen, a champion for a more just and equitable world order.
But even with those global ambitions, they can't ignore their own neighborhood, right?
No, absolutely not.
There are unresolved issues, historical baggage, things that can easily escalate into conflict.
True. Managing those relationships with their neighbors, it's crucial for India's own stability and security. It takes a nuanced approach, combining diplomacy, economic engagement, and that security cooperation.
Okay, so what specific initiatives has India taken to strengthen those ties with their neighbors? I've heard of something called the Gujral Doctrine. What's that all about?
The Gujral Doctrine. It's named after former Prime Minister I.K. Gujral. It came about in the 1990s. It really emphasized building trust and goodwill with those neighbors, particularly the smaller South Asian nations.
Sounds like a good neighbor policy,
Yeah.
recognizing that regional stability benefits everyone.
Yeah. And some of the key elements were non-reciprocal concessions.
Non-reciprocal.
Yeah, meaning India was willing to, go the extra mile to accommodate those concerns, to
Yeah.
build trust, even if it meant they didn't always, get the same benefits in return.
So being the bigger player and using that influence responsibly.
Exactly. Yeah, it also advocated for resolving disputes through dialogue, peaceful means, rejecting the use of force or coercion.
Did this approach work? Did it actually improve relations?
It had a positive impact in some cases, for sure. Helped to reduce tensions, enhance cooperation. But it wasn't, a magic bullet, especially given the complexities with Pakistan. But those underlying principles, building trust, resolving disputes peacefully, prioritizing regional cooperation, they're still relevant.
It shows that strong relationships, even with your neighbors, take time and a willingness to compromise.
Yeah, you got to find those win-win solutions.
And that cooperative spirit, it extends beyond just the immediate neighbors.
Well, India has also been engaging with countries in Central Asia, Southeast Asia,
Yeah.
Recognizing their importance,
Yeah.
for economic and strategic interests.
So tell me about those outreach efforts. I've heard about India's Connect Central Asia policy. What's that all about?
Yeah, so the Connect Central Asia policy, it reflects India's growing engagement with those Central Asian republics, recognizing their strategic importance.
How so?
Well, they're like a bridge
between
Asia and Europe.
Right.
And they have a lot of potential as partners
Yeah.
in energy, trade, and security.
So India is building bridges, literally and figuratively,
Exactly.
connecting with a region that's becoming more and more important.
Yeah, definitely. It involves a lot of things, strengthening those political ties through high-level visits, diplomatic exchanges, promoting that economic cooperation, boosting security cooperation, especially in areas like counterterrorism, and then fostering those people-to-people connections through education and cultural exchanges.
It's a whole package, recognizing how multifaceted these relationships are. What about Southeast Asia? I know India has been pretty active there with their Act East policy.
The Act East policy, it signals a more proactive and strategic approach to engaging with Southeast Asia.
Yeah.
They're recognizing the region's economic dynamism, its strategic importance in the Indo-Pacific, and its potential, right, as a partner in balancing China's influence.
So less observation, more action.
You got
Taking a more assertive role in shaping things. So what's involved in this Act East policy?
It's a lot of things. Strengthening those economic ties through trade agreements, boosting that defense and security cooperation, joint military exercises, intelligence sharing, promoting connectivity through infrastructure projects, deepening those cultural links.
It's a real sign of India's growing ambitions in the Indo-Pacific, right?
Yeah,
A region that's at the center of so much global geopolitics.
absolutely.
But with all this increased engagement and India's growing economic and uh, military might, we can't ignore their nuclear capabilities.
Yeah.
That's a topic that's generated, a lot of debate.
Oh, for sure. India's nuclear program is a significant part of their foreign policy, and it definitely deserves a close look. So India conducted their first nuclear tests back in 1974, declared themselves a nuclear weapon state.
Right.
And that decision, it was driven by a few things: security concerns, those regional rivalries, and the desire to, assert their strategic autonomy on that world stage.
And it got a lot of attention.
Yeah.
And criticism. But India has always said that it's purely for defensive purposes.
Right, as a deterrent against potential threats.
So how do they balance deterrence with restraint?
Well, they've consistently emphasized their commitment to responsible nuclear stewardship. Their nuclear doctrine is based on no first use,
No first use.
meaning they would only use nuclear weapons
Mm-hmm.
in retaliation if someone else attacked them,
Yeah.
their territory, their forces.
Okay, I get it. So it's about sending a clear message,
Yeah.
but also being responsible.
Exactly.
Huh.
And they've also talked about credible minimum deterrent, meaning they maintain enough to deter those potential adversaries, but they're not trying to start an arms race or provoke tensions.
It's a tough line to walk.
It is.
It's clear that India's foreign policy is it's a dynamic force. It's evolving, adapting to those new challenges, seizing opportunities, and reflecting those aspirations for peace, for prosperity, and for global leadership.
And it's a journey that's not over, not by a long shot. As India continues to rise economically and strategically, their foreign policy will keep adapting. It'll reflect their growing influence and their vision for a more just and equitable world order.
So we've covered a lot of ground, from those core principles to their relationships with key countries, to their evolving role in the Indo-Pacific. And it's clear that India's actively shaping that global agenda, making their voice heard on those issues that matter.
And that voice is only going to get, stronger as India continues to grow. It's a fascinating story that's still unfolding, full of challenges, yeah, but also so many possibilities.
It's a story that's being written in real time, right?
Yeah.
A journey that's it's got its twists and turns, but ultimately reflects those aspirations of over 1 billion people, their dreams for a better future, their hopes for a world where India plays a leading role in creating a more just, equitable, and prosperous future for everyone.
And that brings us to another crucial aspect of India's journey, their economic transformation.
Right. India's economic rise, it's been incredible, one of the fastest growing major economies in the world, and people are talking about them as a potential economic superpower.
Exactly. And in part 3, we're going to dive into that remarkable transformation. We'll explore the factors that have driven this economic growth and what it means for India's role on the world stage.
Sounds good. Can't wait to unpack this economic miracle and see how it all, connects to the larger story of India's rise. Stay tuned. Okay, so we're back, and we're ready to dive into the economic side of things.
Yeah, it's a big part of the story.
We've gone deep into Indian politics, those elections, their role in the world. And now it's time for
The
economic miracle.
It's a story that's grabbed everyone's attention. India's emerging as a major player, economically speaking.
It's pretty wild, right? From a nation dealing with, poverty, underdevelopment. Now we're talking about India as a potential economic superpower. So what's fueled this incredible change?
Well, there are a few things.
Yeah.
You have those economic liberalization policies introduced back in the 1990s.
Right.
Those are huge, opened up the Indian economy to foreign investment, trade.
Okay.
Then you've got those investments in education and technology, resulted in a skilled workforce and a growing middle class, which has driven, domestic consumption.
So it's not just about outsourcing or cheap manufacturing anymore.
No, not at all. This is about innovation, a vibrant startup scene, and rising tide,
Right.
lifting millions out of poverty.
That's amazing. So what does all this economic growth actually mean for India's position in the world?
It's given them more influence globally, a stronger voice in those international forums, a bigger role in shaping the global agenda. It's a real shift from being a recipient of aid to a provider to other nations.
Wow, that's a big shift. So economic power, it's translating into geopolitical clout?
Yeah, I think so. They're not just reacting to world events anymore. They're shaping them.
And how has this economic strength changed India's foreign policy?
It's definitely made it more assertive, more strategic, focused on those national interests. There's a real sense of confidence, a recognition that India is a force to be reckoned with in the 21st century.
It's a pretty exciting time to be, watching this all unfold, seeing how they navigate such a rapidly changing world.
It really is. And it's full of, those challenges, but also so much potential. It's really about the aspirations of, well, over 1 billion people, all striving for a better future.
And it's a journey that, well, we've only just begun to explore. We've looked at their political system, their elections, the complexities of their foreign policy.
We've uncovered some of those fascinating details, the driving forces, the challenges they face. But as we've seen, there's always more to discover, more to learn.
India's story, it's still being written. It's a story of transformation, resilience, ambition. And it's not just relevant to, people in India. It's relevant to everyone who's trying to understand the world today.
That's a good point. We're all connected.
Exactly. So think of this deep dive as a starting point.
Yeah, keep exploring. Delve deeper.
India's got this rich history, a vibrant culture, and their role in the world is still evolving. It's fascinating stuff.
So stay curious, keep those questions coming.
Yeah.
And never stop exploring.
Couldn't have said it better myself. We'll be back soon with more deep dives, into all sorts of fascinating topics from all over the world. Until then, keep learning and stay engaged.